With the success of Superman 2025, there's no doubt in my mind that we're officially en route to getting a true Superman saga in live action. And the reason I say true Superman saga is because this time in the DCU, Superman will actually have the ability to cross over with other characters that exist in the DC universe. And while this was also available in the Snyderverse, we know that that universe did not give us a fully fleshed out Superman saga for obvious reasons. And while you could also point to things like the CW, Superman, and Lois, that obviously did not have the high quality budget that the DCU would be able to provide for Superman. So in this video, I'm going to be going over my ideal DCU Superman saga and explaining the direction that I would take the character in based off of the things that we already know. But very quickly before we get into the video, if you guys have been enjoying the content, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and also hit the hype button if you guys have that feature available. It would really mean a lot. Diving right into the video, being that the Superman saga has technically already begun in the DCU, I will be going over the projects that we are confirmed to be getting and that we've already got. Starting with Superman 2025, which was a success for DC Studios and also a great start to the DCU. This movie obviously established a lot of what we know so far about DCU Superman. It also contextualized a lot of things in the DCU, like metahumans being around for over 300 years, or at least being around in the public eye for over 300 years. As far as the Man of Steel himself, we actually find out in this movie that he's been around for 3 years and is around 32 to 33. We also find out in this movie this is the first time that he's actually taken a loss, and this doesn't really have anything to do with the saga, but I just thought it was cool, so I'm referencing it. That being said, it's unclear which villains he's faced up until this point, but we do know for a fact that he's gone up against Cersei and he actually won that fight. And obviously in the movie itself, we know that Lex Luthor gets established, Ultraman gets established, who can later turn out to be Bizarro, which is a theory that I'm heavily invested in. And we also got the Engineer, as well as other heroes like the Justice Gang, which included Guy Gardner, Mr. Terrific, and Hawkgirl. And lastly, but certainly not least, we were also introduced to Supergirl, whose movie is coming out in 2026, and I definitely think it will help further the rest of Superman's story for the DCU. This brings us to the next project in the saga, which is none other than Man of Tomorrow, which is currently gearing up for production. So far, what we know about this film is that it will feature Superman and Lex Luthor joining forces to team up against a larger threat. That larger threat has now been confirmed to be Brainiac. On top of this, it's also being rumored that a bunch of other superheroes are also going to appear in this film, like characters from the Justice Gang that we already saw in Superman 1. Supergirl is also expected to appear in this, and that makes sense considering that Superman is facing off against Brainiac. And I think that this movie will for sure introduce the bottle city of Kandor, which Supergirl has heavy ties to. It's also being rumored that the likes of Wonder Woman may even appear in this film. And like I've said in the past, if Wonder Woman's appearing in this, I would genuinely be shocked if we don't get Batman in this as well. That being said, it makes complete sense as to why James Gunn has never classified this film as a Superman sequel and or Superman 2. And that's because obviously while Superman is playing a major part in this film is going to have a lot of moving parts. As far as what I expect from this film and how it ties into my ideal saga, I think that it will definitely establish Superman's dynamic with Brainiac, and I hope that they use Brainiac as a lingering villain. I don't think that Brainiac should just be killed off after this film. It would really be cool to see him as a threat that continues to loom over the DCU. I'm also expecting to see Lex Luthor continue his quote-unquote redemption arc that he started in Peacemaker Season 2 with Rick Flag Sr. And I think whatever role he plays in helping Superman defeat Brainiac in this movie is going to have a major role in how the public starts to perceive him after this movie. So much so that he might even be released from prison and also given a higher position in the government. In addition, as I mentioned before, I obviously want to see the bottle city of Kandor, and that's because not only do I think Superman needs closure because of the twist that happens in Superman 1 with his parents, I also think that it would be really cool to see the bottle city of Kandor in live action, especially considering we're getting Brainiac, and that's like very key to Brainiac's story, or at least his story in relation to Superman. This would then open the door for another arc that I really want to be in this saga that I'm going to explain later on in this video. But nonetheless, after Man of Tomorrow, the confirmed villains that we know for a fact Superman has fought will be Lex Luthor and Brainiac, which now begs the question, who should Superman fight in his next film? And to me, there's no other answer than Mongol, which brings me to the next film in this saga that will be titled Superman Warworld. And I would want this movie to not only loosely adapt the Superman Warworld saga by Philip Kennedy Johnson, but also the Warworld episodes from the Justice League animated cartoon. And in very similar fashion to both of these stories, I would want Superman to get kidnapped and then obviously imprisoned on Warworld. And while being held captive on Warworld, Superman will then have to compete in battles as a gladiator. And in the process of him doing this, I would want him to expose Mongol for the tyrant he is and also lead a revolution to free all of the captives on Warworld. Personally, I think that this is the perfect type of Superman story to tell in live action after the ones that we get in this universe, and I think that it perfectly continues to push a lot of the themes that have already been established with this version of Superman. And one of the things that excites me the most about this story is that it'll be the first time that we really see Superman go cosmic in all of his stories. And when I say stories, I mean live action stories, obviously. honestly. I think Superman being a superhero abroad, not just on Earth, is something that we haven't seen in live action and is something that we genuinely do need to see in live action. And luckily for us, because of the fact that James Gunn knows ball, we already kind of got a tease that Superman has been off-world in this universe, because after he fought the kaiju in Superman 2025, he made a remark to Guy Gardner saying that he wishes that they could have taken the kaiju to an intergalactic zoo. And I think that the casual nature in which he says this just directly implies that he's been off-world multiple times already in this universe. And on top of that, we also have Supergirl, who just casually flies to planets with red suns to get drunk. So with this being something that already seems to be partially established, I feel like them leaning into it completely in this movie makes a lot of sense. And I also think it would be really interesting to see if a lot of other races on other planets know who Superman is, and if they also love him as a hero or if they hate him. And now that I think about it, this might be something that also kind of gets touched on in Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, considering that she's going to be off-world, and we never know if aliens may recognize her because of the symbol that she wears, tying it to Superman. So I guess that's just something we'll have to wait and see about. Moving on to the next project in this saga, this wouldn't be a direct Superman sequel, very similar to Man of Tomorrow, because it's actually going to be a world's finest movie. And this one I'm going to cover briefly because of the fact that I've already mentioned this project multiple times in other videos, and if you guys have been watching me, you know that I talk about this project all the time. But essentially, I would obviously want this movie to be a team up between Batman and Superman, and I would want it to adapt Superman Batman Public Enemies from Jeff Loeb's 2003 Superman Batman run. And the reason why I think that this is the perfect world's finest story to adapt in the DCU is because of the fact that I genuinely think that all roads are pointing towards Lex Luthor eventually becoming the president in the DCU. And like I've said in other videos, I think that the redemption arc that he starts in Peacemaker Season 2 is ultimately going to get him there. And whatever he does in Man of Tomorrow is probably going to be the first major stepping stone for him to get in position to run for president in the first place. I mean, just think about it. Sure, he tried to destroy Metropolis, but if the optics are he helped save the world from Brainiac, I think that they'll pardon him for all of his troubles. And then from there, we all know and love Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor is going to do what he does best and manipulate the public into getting him to a place that he doesn't deserve to be. And with the state of the DCU already being governments versus corporations versus metahumans, I think that it's entirely possible that when Lex Luthor becomes president, he hires a lot of metahumans to work for him like he already did in Superman 2025, and he puts a bounty on Batman and Superman and has a lot of the heroes and villains try and hunt them down. I also think that this movie is the perfect opportunity to further the idea of Batman and Superman operating as brothers. Obviously, if Batman shows up in Man of Tomorrow, we'll already probably get the foundation of this dynamic, but I think that this is the perfect opportunity to make an entire movie surrounding that dynamic. And we desperately need that because I'm tired of people having the misconception that Batman and Superman aren't friends and they're just co-workers, because they're quite literally brothers in the source material. That being said, we now move into the next project, and this project is going to feature that arc that I had mentioned earlier that I really wanted to be adapted into a movie. And this project is going to be Superman New Krypton. And like it says in the title, it's essentially going to adapt the New Krypton arc written by Jeff Johns that takes place directly after the events of Superman Brainiac. Now, the way I would want it to work in the DCU is that after the events of Man of Tomorrow, Superman will obviously save the bottle city of Kandor from Brainiac's ship. And in the comics, because of the fact that the technology Brainiac used to bottle the city doesn't work outside of his ship, Superman is forced to essentially plant the city next to the Fortress of Solitude. And the city then proceeds to grow back to its original size, meaning that there is now a fully inhabited city of Kryptonians on Earth. And all of them now have the same exact powers as Superman. So naturally, you can imagine the type of turmoil that this would cause on Earth with the state of metahumans and the government already. And I think that this will be a really dynamic story to tell because of the fact that Superman is a man of both worlds, and he's going to want to see both worlds succeed, whereas the people of both Earth and Krypton are respectively going to be fighting for themselves. That being said, one of the changes that I would make to the storyline so that it better fits the DCU is that I wouldn't have the bottle city of Kandor just expand back into normal size as soon as Superman saves it from Brainiac's ship. What I would do is I would take some inspiration from the Silver Age and actually have Superman store the bottle city of Kandor in the Fortress of Solitude at its bottled size. And I'd have Superman desperately be trying to figure out how he can fix the bottleization of the city. And the reason for this would obviously be so that he can find an inhabitable planet to put them on, but also because, very similar to the comic, there's a time limit on Brainiac's bottling technology. And when I say timeline, I don't mean like literal countdown. I would just make it so that the bottle technology can't sustain itself for more than a certain amount of time outside of Brainiac's ship. And obviously at this point, Man of Tomorrow would have been years ago, so I would just want it to be that in this movie specifically, the bottle city of Kandor just decides to not work anymore and it has to grow. And that is what would lead to Superman then planting the city next to his fortress. Another change that would have to happen is that in this story, Supergirl's parents are actually alive and trapped on Kandor, because after Kandor was taken, they on Argo City formulated a plan to go after Brainiac, and in doing so, they got captured and placed on Kandor. So they're actually on Kandor during the new Krypton saga. However, after the assassination of Zor-El by the hands of Superman villains from Earth, Laura then feels as if it's no longer safe for Kryptonians to live amongst humanity and basically starts a war on Earth. And this war eventually leads to the Kryptonians of Kandor City creating a new planet with their science and technology on the other side of Earth's galaxy and inhabiting that planet with Kandor. But because of the fact that I think that Supergirl's mom is going to be dead at this point in the DCU because of them adapting Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, they'll obviously have to go in a different direction in terms of who is going to lead Kandor at this point in time. Now obviously you could still have the assassination of Zor-El because of the fact that he doesn't die Woman of Tomorrow, and you could just tell it the same way it happens in Superman Brainiac, where he tries to go after Brainiac and that's what gets him trapped on Kandor. However, because of the fact that Zor-El is a good guy, when he gets assassinated, you then need an evil or radical Kryptonian to take his place and actually convince the other Kryptonians to go to war with humanity and then eventually leave humanity and create their own planet. Because of the fact that we wouldn't have Allura, who would take the death of Zor-El personally and then feel even more motivated in doing this, we have to then replace her with a Kryptonian that makes sense to carry out this exact same mission, minus the ties of feeling bad for the death of their husband, obviously. And to me, the perfect candidate for this is Jax-Ur, who is also another popular Superman villain that I think would be a pretty good idea to adapt in the DCU. So now that we've established those changes, I think that outside of that, the story should play out exactly the same. And this would lead us directly into the final movie in this saga so far. And the reason why I say that is because I'm genuinely just not sure how many movies they're going to do for Superman, so it's really hard to tell where I should stop or continue the saga. With that being said, the final movie in this saga would be titled Superman Last Son. And again, this movie would take place directly after the events of the new Krypton saga, and with Jax-Ur being an old friend of General Zod and Krypton actually needing a new leader because of the fact that they have an entire new planet, this movie, very similar to the source material, would then feature Jax-Ur releasing General Zod and his other helpers from the Phantom Zone to lead New Krypton. And General Zod, with his hatred of the House of El, will immediately feel compelled to go after Superman. Now I know what you're probably thinking. How is General Zod's dynamic with the House of El going to work the same way it does in the source material in this universe if the House of El is also quote-unquote evil? And to that I would say, I don't actually think that the House of El is going to be entirely evil in this universe, and I have a multitude of reasons as to why I think that. Reason number one being that even though the footage that we see of them in Superman 2025 is pretty damning, James Gunn has gone on record saying that he doesn't view them as actually evil, and the only reason that they resorted to that was because of the fact that they're literally being faced with extinction and they wanted their race to survive. Now obviously this doesn't completely justify it, but because of the fact that they viewed human as ants in comparison to them, they felt like it was justified to send their son to populate this planet and continue the legacy of Krypton. This does not automatically mean that under normal circumstances, Jor-El and Lara were just conquerors on Krypton and that's all they wanted to do. In fact, I think it's even better storytelling if they're just good people who, in the face of extinction, make a horrible decision. And not only would that be a different take that actually makes sense, it would also largely keep intact the true nature of the House of El, at least in relation to the other Kryptonian. And that's because most of the time, other Kryptonians are usually portrayed as having a high sense of superiority and often cold and closed off to other civilizations because of that sense of superiority. If you make it so that Jor-El and Lara aren't usually like that, and the only reason that they resorted to that was because they were literally going to die, I think that this not only gives Superman the closure he needs to embrace Krypton again, but it also adds nuance to the Kryptonians, because then they'd be a lot more like regular humans, because a lot of them have different viewpoints. Some of them could be completely evil like General Zod and his followers, and then you could have others in the middle who under normal circumstances are just like regular humans who are typically good, but under the same circumstances would prefer their race over another alien race. And then lastly, you could have the extremely good Kryptonians like the House of El. And again, the message that was sent to Superman by his parents could just be a moment of weakness, again because of the fact that they were faced with literal extinction. Now that that's established, the way you could have Zod have the exact same dynamic with the House of El is by having Zod during his whole tenure as general on Krypton be pro-space colonization, meaning that because of of Zod's sense of superiority, because of the fact that he's Kryptonian, he's always felt the need to explore other planets and conquer them, and also fill their civilizations with Kryptonian civilization. Because of the fact that most Kryptonians are normal and good people, they would be against this, which would have led to Zod eventually being sent to the Phantom Zone. And Jor-El could be one of the main people who was against this. So when Zod comes back, he effectively has the same exact dynamic with the House of El. However, it's amplified because of the fact that he would feel like if they did do the space colonization when Krypton was destroyed, they would have had somewhere to settle. So not only will Zod feel completely justified in his initial stance, when he finds out that Jor-El was also a hypocrite in death, he will feel even more enraged because of the fact that Jor-El believed the same thing that he did in his final moment. And it would have literally taken the destruction of Krypton for Jor-El to open his eyes, or at least open his eyes in Zod's mind. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like this cooks way harder than the regular Zod and Jor-El dynamic. And that's because there's actual nuance to it now, because even though Zod is technically wrong and he's always been wrong, the fact that Jor-El is a hypocrite kind of justifies Zod's viewpoints in a certain way. And again, just to clarify, I don't mean justified in the sense that what he wanted to do was right, but I mean justified in the sense that you understand his hatred for Jor-El for being a hypocrite. And I also think that this would be a really fresh way to introduce General Zod, considering he's already been adapted several times in the past. And because of the fact that this would essentially be a war against Earth from the Kryptonians, I wouldn't mind if other heroes appeared in this film, like the Justice League or even other teams like the JSA. But overall, that's where I would end the saga. And again, it's specifically because of the fact that I don't know how many films they intend to do for Superman. So if it were up to me, this is where I would stop, and I would obviously leave the door open for Superman to return if there was another idea for another movie after this. And I don't know if this wasn't obvious from the video, but this saga was very Superman specific. So if you're wondering why other members of the Superman family didn't appear in this saga, that was why, because I couldn't really think of ways that I would introduce them because of the fact that it's largely unknown how they're really shaping the rest of the DCU. So to figure out how I would introduce characters like Steel, for example, I'd have to learn a little bit more about the DCU. But overall, that is going to wrap it up for this video, ladies and gentlemen. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and also hit the hype button if you have that feature available. But until next time, it's been your boy K the God, and I'll see you guys in the next one.